Hi guys, this is Phil Evangelinos, and this is a series of videos where I scrutinize all major teachings of the Jehovah's Witnesses under the lens of correct Bible interpretation. Now, this is the second part of the 144,000 videos I'm doing. I strongly recommend that you go back and watch the first part. So today I'm exploring another aspect of the 144,000, one of which you will find countless videos on YouTube, and this is the number 144,000 literal or symbolic? Now, one of the denominations that treats this number as a central doctrine are the Jehovah's Witnesses, and that is because their founder, Charles Taze Russell, spent some years with the Seventh-day Adventists, who also fixate with this number. So was also their founder, Ellen G. White. They too encountered also the same problem when their membership surpassed the number of 144,000. So there was a change in understanding. They started treating the number as a symbolic number, whereas Jehovah's Witnesses doubled down and created this two-class system where 144,000 is still a literal class going to heaven, whereas the great crowd are the ones staying here on earth to turn the earth as a paradise home. So these two classes, they have different hopes. One is the heavenly hope and one is the earthly hope. So let's go now and consider these passages from Revelation 7. So today I consider these three lines of reasonings, which I believe demonstrate that the number 144,000 is literal, which are based in solid Bible interpretation. And that's rules which I established also last time. Unlike preconceived ideas many use to impregnate the text with their own understanding, these rules are accepted from most Bible scholars. So let's see the first line of reasoning, which is the context. The first comes from analyzing the structure of the context in Revelation 7 and verses 4 and 9. There we read, "And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000, sealed out of every tribe of the sons of Israel. After this I saw, and look, a great crowd, which no man was able to number, out of all nations and tribes and peoples and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, dressed in white robes, and there were palm branches in their hands." So we have 144,000 on one side and a great crowd or a great multitude on the other. After the Apostle John was told in vision about this group of 144,000 individuals, he was shown another group. John describes this second group as a great crowd, which no man was able to number, out of all nations and tribes and peoples and tongues, or as many other translations render it, great multitude. Have that in mind because I'm going to use it later on. This great crowd refers to those who will survive the coming great tribulation, which will destroy the present wicked world. And that is when you read other verses in Revelation later on, and also verse 14 in chapter 7. Note, however, the contrast that John draws between verses 4 and 9 of Revelation chapter 7. He states that the first group, those who were sealed, has a definite number. However, the second group, a great crowd, is without a definite number. So with that in mind, it is logical to take the number 144,000 to be literal. If the number 144,000 were symbolic and referred to a group that is actually numberless, the force of the contrast between those two verses, verse 9 and 14, sorry, verse 4 and 9 would be something that would be lost. In other words, the context strongly indicates that the number 144,000 must be taken literally. Various Bible scholars, past and present, reach the same conclusion. That is, the number is literal. For instance, in commenting on Revelation 7, 4 and 9, British lexicographer Dr. Ethelbert Bollinger observed some 100 years ago, it is the simple statement of fact, a definite number in contrast with the indefinite number in this chapter. And this comes from his work, The Apocalypse of the Day of the Lord, from page 282. More recently, another scholar, Robert Thomas, Jr., professor of New Testament at the Master's Seminary in the United States, wrote, the case for symbolism is exegetically weak. He added, it is a definite number at 7, 4, in contrast with the indefinite number of 7, 9. If it is taken symbolically, no number in the book can be taken literally. That is the book of Revelation. And that comes from his book, The Exegetical Commentary of Revelation, page 474. Now, another line of reasoning to prove that this is a literal number is the difference between multitude and a number in the Bible. Now, number and multitude are different words, and they have been used in contrast in few times in Bible verses. So when you see a multitude, it's not a number. And when you see a number, it is not a multitude or a crowd, as Jehovah's Witnesses call this multitude that the Bible says, and they call it crowd. Let's see a couple of verses to prove this argument. So for that, I'm going first to a verse in Genesis 16 and verse 10. Then it says, then Jehovah's angel said, I will greatly multiply your offspring so that they will be too numerous to count. Do you see the difference here? Number and multitude. So you see the multitude is different from a numbered crowd. Let's see another verse in 1 Kings 3, verses 7 and 8. And now, Jehovah, my God, you have made your servant king in the place of David, my father, though I am just a youth, and I am inexperienced. Your servant is among your people, whom you have chosen. A people so vast that they cannot be numbered or counted. Again, a multitude is something that cannot be counted or numbered. A third verse now, I'm reading from the King James Version, Judges 6 and verse 5, because it's easier to see the contrast between multitude and number. We read, for they came up with their cattle and their tents, and they came as grasshoppers for multitude. For both they and their camels were without number, and they entered into the land to destroy it. So do you see again the contrast between the two, number and multitude? 2 Chronicles 5:6 again from the King James Version, where we see better the contrast between the words. Also King Solomon and all the congregation of Israel that were assembled unto him before the ark sacrificed sheep and oxen, which could not be told, not numbered for multitude. It is clear to see from these 4 verses that in biblical terms, a multitude or crowd is not a number, and a number is not a multitude. Now, let's go to the third, and I think the most strong line of reasoning to prove this is a literal number. As we said previously, the book of Revelation is filled with echoes from the Old Testament, and chapter 7 is an echo of the famous account of the Exodus in the Old Testament. In actual fact, The book of Revelation is fashioned after the book of Exodus in many aspects, but this is something for a different video. Now I'm going through this argument of strong Bible interpretation. A way to correctly interpret the Bible of Revelation is by looking in the text for Old Testament imagery or symbols. This method has been tried and tested by many non-Bible scholars. One of the hardest parts of reading Revelation is knowing where the images and the symbols refer to. Even when we understand what's happening at the text and vision levels, we may not know what's going on at the reference level. We usually know what Revelation is saying, but we're often not sure what it's talking about. So the two places to go to, as many scholars have pointed out, for answers are the first century historical context and the Old Testament. So although there is no explicit Old Testament quotation in Revelation, the book is filled with echoes and allusions to the Old Testament. In actual fact, Revelation contains more Old Testament references than any other New Testament book. Almost 70% of its verses contain Old Testament references. So we have references from the book of Psalms, from the book of Isaiah, from the book of Daniel, and the book of Ezekiel, that they make the most contributions to Revelation. Having that in mind, let's consider the only other account in the Bible where we find again two similar groups: a great crowd and a special number of Jews in the same storyline, as we do in Revelation 7. All we have to do is to go back to the 12th chapter of the book of Exodus, and we will see the exact same setting. Before we read this chapter, we need to first consider the background of these verses. At the end of the 10 plagues of Egypt, the Egyptians had suffered terrible losses. Not only their land had been devastated, suffered terrible calamity in the hands of God, but they had also lost their livestock. And finally, they had lost their firstborns. These plagues had demonstrated beyond any shred of doubt that the gods of Egypt were no match for the Yahweh or Jehovah, the God of the Israelites. So, or the God of the slaves, as the Egyptians used to call it. A choice was presented to the nation of Israel, Egypt then. Follow the true God Jehovah, or ignore what just happened and stay behind. Carry on living life as you did before. In the future, the same choice will be presented to the disobedient mankind when they will experience calamities in the hands of God that ignore or disrespect today. So we read what happened in the aftermath of the 10th plague, which is the plague of when they lost their firstborns, in Exodus 12:33-36. And there it says, "And the Egyptians urged the people that they might send them out of the land in haste, for they said, 'We shall all be dead.' So the people took their dough before it was leavened, having their kneading bowls bound up in their cloths on their shoulders." And in verse 35 says, "Now the children of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, and they had asked from the Egyptians articles of silver, articles of gold, and clothing. And the Lord," in verse 36, "and the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they granted them what they requested. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. So the majority of the Egyptians just wanted the Israelites to go. They would just want them to go away. But some Egyptians, along with other slaves or people of other nationalities residing in Egypt at the time, went along with the Israelites. Now, we read in Exodus 12, 37 and 38 of that incident. And pay attention, this is the important verse. Then the children of Israel journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, besides children. And in verse 38, we see the great crowd. A mixed multitude or a great crowd went up with them also, and flocks and herds, a great deal of livestock. So on one hand, we have 600,000 literal Jews with their families, wives and children. And on the other hand, we have a great crowd, like the book of Revelation, of non-Jews exiting Egypt. This is similar to Revelation 7. In the future, in the same way, 144,000 of literal spiritual Israelites will escape the cities of the world, along with a great multitude of people who will follow them in what has been termed from many scholars as the Greater Exodus. Anyone who is trying to make the case that the 144,000 are a symbolic number, they not present any verse as a basis for their argument. Like I did, there is echoes from the Old Testament and there is structural evidence within the chapter to say this is a literal number. All you have to do is to consider the parallel account of Exodus, where 600,000 literal Israelites made their way out of Egypt. The symbolic explanation. So I will consider some arguments about the symbolic explanation of the 144,000. The first one is based on numerology. There are those who believe that the number of 144,000 is a symbolic number. Now let's consider some of these explanations and notice how they are not based in strong interpretive foundations. The first comes from James Kaufman's commentary, where in reference to 100 to the 144,000 has this to say: 12 is multiplied by itself and then again by 1,000, indicating completeness and perfection to the ultimate degree. Because as we know, 12 as a number is utilized to symbolize completeness in the Bible, perfection, and God's power throughout Bible. In other words, we see the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 disciples of Jesus. So they use this numerology to explain the number 144,000, which you have to engage in mental gymnastics, multiplying 12 times 12 and then times 1,000 in order to end up with the correct number, which sounds a bit of a stretch, and is something that is not implied in Revelation context, chapter 7, that you have to do anyway. Nowhere does the Bible says in Revelation chapter 7, you have to go on and do this arithmetic, right? This calculating. Now, another one is the equal standing, as I call it. In his sermon entitled The Believer's Glad Prospects, Charles Spurgeon, a very well-known pastor from the 19th century, gave an explanation of Revelation 7 and verses 4 to 9. And then it says, the 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes with Judah and Benjamin joined together stand in equal position. Spurgeon declared that the day shall come when first and last shall rejoin together in the equal blessing of the Most High. Again, where did that come from? Is there something in the chapter to suggest we have to do this equalizing? Again, Spurgeon begins from a preconceived idea that we will one day in the future stand as equals in front of God, and somehow he impregnates the verse about the 12 tribes of the 144,000 with this understanding. Again, personally, I'm not convinced. If you are, just let me know below in the comment section. Another take is that what we see in Revelation 7 is the same group made out from different numbers. So this interpretation is what we see in Revelation 7 is the same group of believers described from two different viewpoints. In his article on Christianity.com, which I mentioned in a different place, Hank Hanegraaff, a well-known American Bible author, had this to say: the 144,000, the great multitude, are not two different peoples, but two different ways of describing the same purified bride. From one vantage point, the purified bride is numbered, from another is innumerable, a great multitude that no one can count. Again, where did this come from? Is there some text in the Bible where I can go and take this reference from? So Hanegraaff also points out that other instances in the Bible where numbers are used symbolically. Yes, I do understand that. But why use it here? We don't have any right to do that here. The figurative use of the whole number 1,000 is common in the Old Testament usage, he said. God increased the number of the Israelites 1,000 times, as it says in Deuteronomy 1:11. Again, this sounds great, but where is the evidence, internal justification from chapter 7 to point out to Deuteronomy 1:11? There is no internal testimony in the chapter 7 of Revelation to prove this claim. So I find most of the attempts to ascribe symbolic meaning to the 144,000 poor theology and wanting. If you don't agree, please let me know below. So if the 144,000 are a literal number of end-time Christians, who are the great crowd then? Are they a secondary class of Christians that will go to heaven, as Russell believed? Or are they Christians with an earthly hope to turn the earth into paradise, as Rutherford used to preach and later on changed the doctrine, as we know, in the Jehovah's Witnesses? The answer will surprise you. I have a very different take on the great crowd, and I base it on scripture. So tune in next Sunday morning, UK time, when I consider the question, who are the great crowd? So having said that, this is coming to the end of my video. Now, before I go, I would like to thank you for helping this channel to grow. We have almost 1,500 subscribers, with just 2 months this channel being on YouTube. And I'm very pleased, and I thank you so much for listening in every time. If you found this video informative in any way, please like and subscribe, as it helps the YouTube's algorithm. And you will find a link to this article on my website in the description area below. Also, if you're interested in Bible prophecy, I have already authored a book, The 5 Planetary Disasters of the End, that is currently available on Amazon, and there is one coming out soon. So that is on Amazon, and there is a link below on my description area. So thanks for listening to me, guys. Have a lovely day, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye for now.